Hi. Welcome to Book Pop. I'm Jamie Anderson.
And I'm Molly Fish.
And we have a very exciting show today because we have our very first guest, Lindsay Christians.
Yay,
Thank you so much for
welcome.
being here.
Thank you for having me. This is amazing.
Oh, I'm so glad. Lindsay is a food editor and arts writer for the Cap Times here in Madison, Wisconsin. She has also written 2 cookbooks, Madison Chefs and Osteria Papavero. And you do many other things, but we're going to get to that because the first question that we have to ask every episode is, what are you reading?
So actually, I just finished it this morning.
Love that.
But I love short stories. And I love short stories as a way of finding new novels as well. So I read primarily fiction. So I just finished reading the 2023 O. Henry Prize short stories.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it's really wonderful because sometimes you'll come across something and be like, did I read that somewhere already? You know, because we get the New Yorker, and so I'll read the fiction in the New Yorker. But it's a great way of saying, I love this person's writing. You get just a little bit of it, and then it opens up new doors. So I read a lot of short stories.
Love that.
Good for you.
Yeah.
We have a short story section here because I always love, I think it's important to like call out that this is a whole thing and a genre that people should explore more. And it just, I don't know. It doesn't do as well as I want it to. I'm always like, look at these beautiful books.
Yeah.
And especially single author ones, I think maybe people are scare people, but I think that compilations and anthologies are more exciting
I agree.
for the reason that you're talking about of like, you get to taste different authors and different writing styles.
Exactly. And there will be ones in an anthology like that you don't really vibe with. You're like, this is not really a style that I'm into. But, you know, the previous iteration, I think, of this particular compilation had a Kevin Wilson story in it. Any introduction to him is great. And also, there are authors like Alice Munro who just do short stories. And if you want to see how narrative can work, how character building can work in such beautiful, nuanced ways, short stories have so much to give.
It's true. And it's almost like harder to write a short story because you really have to only have what's essential in there. So it looks like you can see a master of their craft when they write a really good short story.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they have to get to the point in such a concise way and introduce all these different things and make it digestible and juicy. And like, so you want to come back and keep reading some of that.
They're great for travel. I will say that.
Oh, I love that.
Good point.
Because you're, you know, especially like if you're in
You
the
don't
middle
have to keep
of
track of a whole narrative.
Exactly. Yes. It's great.
What else have you read recently? Any other favorites?
Recently, oh my gosh, I was scanning my Goodreads before this just so that I could remember all the things that I wanted to mention. I read primarily literary fiction. That's mostly what I read. And I kind of have specific things that I'm looking for. I'm looking for great characters. I'm looking for, you know, a plot needs to be there, but if it's just somebody really interesting who I can spend time with, that's generally fine. But I just read Fiona and Jane, and I'm going to blank on the author's name. But Fiona and Jane was great.
I don't have it either.
Right to mind, yeah.
No.
But I feel like I have been going through and just waiting to get, there's a new Zadie Smith that I don't have in hand yet. And so I'm waiting for that one. The Fraud, yeah. So there are a couple like that I've read.
The Fraud is also on my TBR table.
My mom's reading it right now.
Is she?
She loves it.
Does she? Oh, that's good. That'll, knock it up a few.
I recently read several books by Jen Began after having read Big Swiss.
Okay.
So one is called Vacuum in the Dark. And it's the things that the characters in those books say and do just feels just this much off. And it really catches you. And I really like that. I like her style of writing in its specificity, but it's so vivid and so odd in a really wonderful way. There's another author, I want to say it's like Kristen Burnett. I'm like spacing on her name too. But she does like things that are a little bit gross on every single page.
Sure.
Where you're like, oh, there's going to be, and I started to track like, is there going to be a page of this book where something doesn't make me go, ugh?
Yeah.
And every single page did. It was that one in particular was a book about a woman who did taxidermy.
Ooh.
Oh.
Rough.
Okay. And it's just really specific about the taxidermy.
Uh-huh.
Like, okay.
So you kind of like that feeling of the like uncomfortableness.
Yeah.
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 Because I feel like that's a big literary fiction thing, and people who like it, the writing and the, like you're talking about, specificity and an author's voice is so specific in literary fiction. And usually the characters are a little more off or just like specifically defined and very precise. And I personally love that. Like we were just talking about Lauren Groff before we got started.
Yeah.
And I think about her language, and it's so poetic almost, like they're fragment sentences, and she just does whatever the hell she wants with words on the page. And you're like, oh, this is exciting the way that she writes. And the characters, even when it's hard and the subject matter is hard, it feels like it's special. Maybe that's like the word. So then even if it's like about taxidermy, you could be like, this feels special though, because it's so unique.
And they're in control. It feels like you're being held.
Exactly. You feel safe in what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like,
even if it's uncomfortable.
they know what they're doing.
Yep.
Yeah. They're holding you.
Good point.
A couple other things that I read recently that I really enjoyed. I read a book by Angie Kim called Happiness Falls. Her first book was Miracle Creek, also excellent, and also with an element of mystery to it. I don't know that I would call it a mystery or classify it as a mystery, but it's about this family, and one of the kids who's in his teens is developmentally disabled and is not able to speak. And we find out just about the assumptions that his family has been making about him and how that's connected to the disappearance of the father that happens at the very beginning of the book. So you're trying to sort of figure out and piece together what happened to dad, while also trying to find out what this kid knows because he was there, and protect the kid too, because, it's law enforcement is involved now, and they're trying to find the dad, and the family sort of rallying around him, while also not quite understanding what all he's able to take in and retain and communicate. So that was very chewy and very fascinating book. Could not put that one down.
And did they have stuff from his perspective then, like his inner voice, or so you don't get his perspective?
The whole book is from the perspective of his sister.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Because it kind of reminds me of Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, where you do get, there's this nonverbal child character. Yeah, exactly. But the fact that you get the inside his head version, because he's, perfectly aware of everything going on around him. Like those chapters that were inside his head were just some of my favorites.
He can see what's going on. He can sense danger. He knows when he needs to get out. He knows who's protecting him and who's not, exactly. That kind of thing. So yeah, for sure. I also just read Hernan Diaz's Trust. Beautiful.
Also
one of
my
Jamie's
favorite.
Oh my gosh. I love the way that book gives you a narrative and then gives you more as you're going forward of things that sort of undercut what you think is true. And I love an unreliable narrator.
Right. Yeah. And then that last chapter from the perspective of the wife is just, that's a crazy way to end the whole story. Like based on where you start it, giving this narrative that's basically not true. It's like a novel included in the book. And then just you slowly get to learn about the reality of the situation. And then now you're just punched in the gut with her own perspective.
Yeah.
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 It's a good one.
Yeah. That was, it's hard, right? It's hard to know, but it makes you think about the way that story works and the stories that we tell each other, which is something that we're all interested in as book lovers.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Do you have any books that you consistently recommend to people? Like maybe just like all-time favorites, or even in your line of work, like things related to cooking, like favorite cookbooks you recommend?
Oh my gosh. I mean, recommending a cookbook is sort of like recommending a restaurant.
Yep.
Right. Where you immediately want to know more. It's like, how much are you interested in spending? Like what kind of cuisine are you interested in? What, in the case of cookbooks, like how do you want to use it? Right. Because the thing with a cookbook, and a really good cookbook, is that the things that it has going for it are two things. One, that those recipes have been tested, right? It's not a rando on the internet just throwing some stuff there. But the other thing is author voice. So I just recently picked up, I was reading it in bed this morning, actually. I picked up Dan Pashman's new cookbook called Anything's Possible, which is very cute.
So cute. Love that title.
And he did like a 4-part podcast. He runs the Sporkful. It's a food podcast. And he did a 4-part series about how he made the cookbook. And I was like, well, sold. I mean, I need this. But his author voice is so, again, specific. And he's giving you recipes not only that are going to work, that have been tested and are going to work, but also come from a very specific perspective. They're something that he says, I have to make this again. Like, this is so good, and I want to tell you why, and why you should, take the time to get these ingredients and learn this technique and make this.
Amazing.
I did a little experiment, I guess, sort of. My friend Kristen picked up Molly Baz's first book, Cook This Book, and I just kind of got on a roll and made every recipe in it.
Amazing.
I have her second one more, and I'm obsessed with it.
The fried chicken in that book, in the second one, excellent. It's so
all right,
good.
Noted. Gonna have to happen.
Yeah, it's really, really good. There's like a dust on it that has like nutritional yeast and a little bit of like hot pepper. It's so good. And she puts pickle brine and everything.
Love that. And I also love that she's like uses an entire bunch of herbs for every recipe. It's like none of that is going to waste. We're using the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like, I'm all in for that.
It always depends, I think, on like, my mom, she wants things to be relatively straightforward. She doesn't want to cook with anchovies. She's Ina Garten girl. She loves Ina Garten. I have been cooking lately out of Palestine, which is sort of, I think of it as in the Ottolenghi universe. Of cookbooks, but it's specifically Palestinian food, and it's just, again, tons of herbs, really beautiful, fresh flavors, lots of lemon, that kind of thing. So I do think I'm going to be moving more in a grilling direction because of the weather we've been having. So there are recipe writers or cookbook authors that I go to again and again. Melissa Clark is one.
Yeah.
Her book Dinner is like a core text in my house, right? So something like that. I love, Smitten Kitchen. There are so many of these that are like designed to be very accessible to folks.
For sure.
But you can do deeper dives into specific cuisines. Andrea Nguyen is an excellent recipe writer, and she does a lot with Vietnamese cuisine. And if you are just like, I love this restaurant, I want to make more food like this, there are cookbook authors who are like there to meet you.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Nice. Good answer.
Yeah.
Right? I love that. So that kind of ties into Madison Chefs, because talk about cuisine that's very specific and not so much in like a regional way like Italian or Mexican food, but in a Madison way.
Yeah.
It's really core restaurants that built the food scene in Madison, and it's such a cool dive into the history of those chefs. And I actually was working at UW Press when it came out. So I'm a huge fan, and I pushed it real hard because I'm a huge fan. But yeah, what was the experience with kind of investigating those stories and getting to know the Madison food scene like that?
It was a really interesting process, because up until that time, and then for a few years after that as well, I was a restaurant critic, a food writer. And so for the most part, when you're a restaurant critic, you go in and you do not tell anybody that you're coming. You don't say, hey, I'm here. Do you know who I am? You don't do any of that. You go several times, you keep it on the DL, and you're doing your research, but it's a very different kind of thing. Whereas for the book, I went and I sat up at people's bars, and I, just talked with servers, and I talked with the chefs' mentors, their families. I did deep dives. I found obituaries for people's grandparents, and just really taking a pretty journalistic approach, because that's what I like to do, while also trying to paint this sort of full contextual picture, because a book like that, it's sort of going to be an archival piece as soon as it's published, right? Even as the book was coming out, some of the restaurants that are mentioned in it were closing, because restaurants have natural lives. They're something of the moment. So that was really interesting too, to sort of think about I'm writing about Underground Food Collective, which still has a pretty substantial impact on the food that we eat here in Madison now, and where it comes from and what it looks like. But those restaurants specifically are gone. Yeah. So looking at it when am I writing this, and who am I writing it for, and trying to always keep that top of mind, and not letting myself get too in the weeds about it, right? But just really keeping that focus on what is this for? We're going to tell a story of this food cuisine.
But it must have been so fun to finally get to be there and be asking all the questions that you want, and not having to hide and, be there in secret. Ooh, how am I going to rate these things? wow, what a great experience to go
Yeah.
sit at the bar and really just get the inside scoop.
Yeah, I would like tuck myself back in a kitchen
Oh, yeah.
and be like,
Observe.
okay, like what am I noticing here? Like that guy has a lot of Ninja Turtle tattoos. Let's find out what the story is behind that, you know? Or I mean that's the fun part.
Mm-hmm.
But the other part of it is, and this is a little bit darker, because I was able to go more behind the scenes, I was then able to report out some stories after that connected to the Me Too movement in restaurants and the treatment of women and the way that was changing and how people were becoming more willing to speak up about treatment in kitchens that has not been great.
Mm-hmm.
And not every kitchen is going to be its own place, but they have been, pretty militaristic places, especially the fine dining places, and not great places for women to work, as particularly in back of house.
So did some of that come up when you were investigating the book? You were kind of going like,
I was just
noticing some things.
I was kind of noticing some stuff, but also I met people and I got people's names and contact info. And I was able, as I was sort of like looking into some of those issues, it is a ridiculous percentage. It's something like 98, 99% of women who've worked in restaurants have reported harassment by someone. So people they work with, managers, customers often for waitresses and servers, right? So it's pretty pervasive as to be almost just like part of the soup that you're swimming in. Or I don't know, that's a weird metaphor that I'm mixing, but
I like swimming in soup.
Right? Swimming in soup. But it really was a question of I'm talking with these people, they're seeing that I'm a human being.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's really a pretty natural response to media coming in, especially like if you're someone whose employment is easily canceled or you don't want to talk to the media. What's in it for you? Right. Why would you want to do that? So getting people to sort of trust me and say, I will treat your story with respect. I will treat it with care, and being able to kind of go behind the scenes, you get all of the things. You get like the grandma's recipe, but you also get the rest.
Yeah.
Well, good for you. And thank you for doing that work. It's not all good, right?
Yeah.
In any industry, we want to make sure we're showing.
Oh yeah.
Madison Chefs.
That mostly the stuff that's in this book is good stuff. There were some things where I had to go back to the chefs and say, hey, this controversial thing happened and I'm going to need to ask you about it. Because like it's still, we're still in the process of writing this book, and I give the chefs sort of an opportunity to respond to some things that came up, because I didn't only want to be like, wee, rah, rah, everything's amazing, food, yay,
for sure,
which I think is a cliche about food writing too, right? It's just this is my grandma's cake, and which is great, but also it's not just that.
All the warm fuzzies.
Right.
How did you get into food writing? So like full disclosure, I have known Lindsay since she was a journalism major, right? Back at Michigan State University. And randomly, not randomly, but coincidentally, we both ended up back in Madison. I'm from here originally. And now I've got to see your illustrious career and how it has grown. And now you are the Lindsay Christians. So I'm just curious, how did you get started? Were you always a foodie? Did writing about food become like were you doing it at Michigan State at all, or did it happen much later?
No, I was like a hardcore theater kid. Like I wanted to be a theater critic.
This is why we were friends.
I wanted to be a theater critic. I wanted to do arts journalism. I still do arts journalism. Yeah. It's a big part of what I do. But the way that media has gone between the time when we were in college and now is it's gotten a lot smaller, and many jobs have gone away. Mm-hmm. That sort of resulted in, we had a food writer, and when that person left and decided to go do something else, I just took another beat. So it just sort of added on. And I was always a pretty enthusiastic cook. I still am. I come from home cooking. I mean, I worked as like a barista and a wine shop employee and that kind of thing, but I never like worked a line. I didn't go to culinary school. So it was really a question of, food writers are primarily writers, and you have to be able to sort of describe food. But one thing that I found really interesting as the job has kind of evolved is I think there has been, and still in many ways continues to be, a perception, as I said, of food writing being kind of fluffy. Like we're gonna talk about whether the soup was seasoned properly, and how quickly I got my water refilled. Mm-hmm. And there, I think, is a place for that, but especially with the proliferation of sites like Yelp and other things where people can just be like, well, I went and the wait was 2 hours. I think there is a place for more nuanced, contextual writing around food, and that is what really interests me. I like being able to ask questions about why things work the way they do and look at food in the context of culture and history and class and race and all kinds of things. What kind of business owners get the kind of equity and support that they need to start food businesses, and also how immigrant folks who don't speak English can start food businesses, because that's something you can do. Like, you can make food for people and you don't have to have, great English skills right off the bat. So those kinds of things really have spoken to me, as well as some of that investigative work that I talked about as well. And so that has kind of kept me in it, like, and interested as a journalist,
right?
Versus just like talking about, recipes and writing and that kind of thing, which are wonderful. Like, I love those things too. But I feel like that having all of that as being very open in food writing has really kept me kind of interested in it, where it really just started as like, well,
a beat you were assigned.
We need somebody to do this. So it's going to be me.
That's awesome. I
Yeah.
didn't know that. That's how you got started. Because I think of you as such an authority in Madison on like food, and but just the way you write about it is so great. But it seems like maybe you could be thrown any beat then, then you would be able to write about it intelligently.
I did do politics for a little while back in Michigan. I did not like it. I did not like it. I was like, I asked you this question and you have answered something totally different.
Right.
Like, why?
Politicians.
Why are we doing this?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So what was it like? I'm curious about two things. First of all, co-writing, like what that was like. And then also what your relationship to being a really great reader, which you also are, and then being a writer, and how those things work together for you. So I guess first let's talk about the Osteria Papavero Cookbook, which you co-wrote.
Yes. Yeah. This was fun. This was really fun, actually.
Yeah. What was that experience like?
So I learned some things from the first book. I learned the tech that I wanted to use to make, because the first chapter of the first book took me like 4 or 5 months. And then every chapter after that went faster. So by the time I was writing the Papavero book, it was really, I had kind of my methods down and I knew kind of how I wanted to do it. But this was a dream that Francesco had for years. Like, he always wanted to write a cookbook. He wanted something to leave for his family, because he said, when my kids were little, I spent so much time in the restaurant and, not with them. And he wanted to leave them something, which I thought was really lovely. He is a lifelong learner. Frank has a lot of degrees. He is someone who is just constantly curious and wanting to know how things work and wanting to find different recipes from different places. So he came into this project with a list of the recipes that he knew he wanted to include. He had very rough versions of many of them. And he also had like ideas of, we talked about how we wanted to structure the book, right? So like different regions in Italy that he had strong connections to, because he's from Bologna, but he spent time in the mountains, and then he also spent time on the sea, in the ocean, by the ocean. So he has all these wonderful connections to these things, and so we sort of separated out some of the recipes based on those regions versus like appetizer, main course, salad, whatever.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we put the book together. And then it was in the summertime, I would go by on Saturday mornings when the restaurant was closed, and he would have one or two of his cooks on, and we would just prep a bunch of the recipes. I would ask a gazillion questions, like as things are making, I'm like, okay, you say this many fennel, but I need you to like weigh them or something, because fennel can be really small or really like this, the size of a baby's head. So it's like really variable. So let's talk about like, what are you actually doing here?
Getting into the weeds. I love that.
Yeah. But also talking about like a restaurant kitchen is not a home kitchen, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be very aware of like, okay, you're using this size pan. That's not a common size pan that people
Nobody
have
has that size pan.
And there was one, I think it was like a ragu sauce or something. And I was watching one of his cooks who was prepping it. And I'm like, you just added water. Stop. Wait. like, what are you doing? So, because they're just doing it because they're noticing it and they're fixing it. Yeah. And they're adjusting for consistency and for seasoning and all of these things. And I'm like, slow down. So, and also Francesco is very particular about using specific ingredients that come from Italy, some of which you can order directly because you're a chef and you've got these connections to these certain distributors. And I'm like, where are people getting green lasagna pasta sheets? Like literally green.
Great point.
Where
You were speaking for the everyman.
yeah. And I was like, can they use regular lasagna pasta? And he's like, no, that's not what this is. And I'm like, okay, well, where though?
Yeah.
Because I'm looking, and there's like some markets in Milwaukee where you can get it. You can get it like at Italy. You can order it online a little bit. Like it's not even that easily orderable. Like it's a pain. So one of my testers who made that lasagna used just like regular lasagna sheets, and it came out beautifully.
Right.
And one of my other testers of the same recipe was like, well, it says spinach lasagna sheets. I'm going to make fresh pasta, which she did, and it just disintegrated.
Oh, wow.
So that's why you test them. So we did all the things in the restaurant, and then I had like, I want to say 15 or 20 people, including like my mother and friends who,
because you want different levels of experience
you want different
to
levels
test
of
it.
experience.
Yeah.
One guy had worked at Harvest, and I met him during the first book, and he was like, oh, I love Francesco, I would love to test some recipes. So he tested some and gave some feedback. But yeah, you want people like with a broad range. There was one of my freelance writers, Nicole, has a background in pastry and was able to test some of the breads and gave some great feedback there. So that was really cool. But there's like a form that everybody fills out, and you say like, this recipe worked or not. This is what I would adjust. This is what wasn't clear. These are things that worked and didn't work. One recipe we found was just way, way too salty, and my tester had to throw away her first batch of dough and then like make it again. So I'm just so grateful for all those people.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
So absolutely.
But it means that all the recipes that Francesco had, we know that they all work. They work in home kitchens. They should hopefully be really clear, for people to follow. There are some of those that I would make it for a special occasion.
Yeah.
And there are some that like I will make forever. There's a carrot ginger soup in there that's just, it's so good. It's just knockout delicious. It's absolutely wonderful.
Well, and it's such a beloved restaurant that I think some people from like the book selling experience, some people just buy it as like a keepsake of this restaurant that they love. And they're like, even if like they want to just go to the restaurant and have the real thing, right? Yeah. But then they get to just kind of get a peek behind the scenes almost of like what, even if I'm never going to order that spinach lasagna paper, the fact that you almost appreciate it more going to the restaurant and eating it and being like, these are things I can't even make myself.
Yeah.
At least that's me personally.
It's one of my favorite restaurants. I love Osteria Papavero.
It's really wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, it was fun. One of my testers made this crispelle dish, and I'm so grateful for her because she made the full recipe and she lives alone. And she's like, hey, it was a little heavy and it was a lot of food. And I was like, well, okay.
Eat it for a week.
Like it's designed to be that way, but like she's cooking solo. So she's just like, I just ate it a lot of times. And I'm like, all right, like, okay.
Leftovers.
So, yeah, people were really, they were very generous with their time. And
that's amazing.
Yeah, I was really also very grateful to have a book launch that was not in like deep COVID.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
2023 was very different than 2021.
It was. And like my book launch for the first book was like December 30th, 2021, which was like Omicron.
Yeah.
And everybody was getting and we couldn't find tests.
Yeah.
So like right before the launch, like something like 2/3 or 3/4 of the people who'd RSVP'd yes changed their RSVP. And I was like, well, I still have some bottles of sparkling wine in my basement that's from the launch, and I think it'll last for the rest of my life. But you get a good story. You're like, well, there were like 6 of us and we had a good time.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Omicron.
Yeah.
All right, we got to talk podcasting.
Yeah.
Because Lindsay hosts her own podcast, The Corner Table, since 2016, correct?
Yes, off and on. Very off and on. Yeah. For a while, I was like, every week. And then I got real tired. Yeah.
So for first-time podcasters, do you have any advice for us?
Yes, please.
Yep.
So my advice is just, it's very key to sort of my personality too, which is overplan. I tend to overplan a lot. The thing that I've found that I really like with podcasts is an authentic voice, a voice that sounds like you. And I think that's a big thing. I really like having a variety of guests on and not trying to be too prescriptive about how they sound.
Right.
So letting people kind of be themselves on a podcast is really nice.
Yeah.
I also really like collaboration, co-pro, that kind of stuff where it's like I just recently on Arts Educators Save the World, which is a wonderful podcast made here in Madison by Erica Halverson. And then she came on my podcast and we talked about Top Chef because she's a huge Top Chef fan. And that's our focus right now. We're going week by week with Top Chef Wisconsin. So.
Oh, I've been listening.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm a huge Top Chef fan,
really good time,
and I've been listening to your podcast every week. It's really fun.
We're having a lot of fun with it. And I think, just that I think is a big thing. I was making a podcast in a situation where I did not have a lot of other people working on it with me. I think if I could do it any way I wanted to, I would have more support. Like, no offense to the Cap Times, they're wonderful, but it's hard to make a podcast mostly solo.
Doing it on your own. Yeah. Shout out to Pete back there.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Pete.
So, but yeah, that's my main advice. I think just being yourself.
I love the authenticity thing. That was a big thing going into it that I wanted us
we were
to
leaning
have
into that
is
hard.
just to be like, it almost kind of goes in contrast to the over planning, which we also both do naturally, where I was like, I want to over plan, but then I want to loosen up and then just be authentic with it. Yeah. So like we feel comfortable enough because we have planned that we can loosen up and then just enjoy it. So that's great. I feel really good now that we're already kind of on the road to following Lindsay's advice.
I really like Anne Helen Peterson and Culture Study. I like her vibe. I really like Celebrity Memoir Book Club, which is very fun. I like to joke that I read almost primarily only fiction with the exception of memoir. I do like to read some memoir, like culinary memoir in particular.
Yeah.
But I read mostly fiction. But what I like to do is I like it when people read nonfiction, like on Books Could Kill, and then tell me about it.
Yes.
So
If Books Could Kill is my new favorite podcast.
It's great.
It's so good.
I was listening to the one on Lean In on the way here.
Yep. Although it is because they like mostly only do books that they're like debunking.
Right.
It is. I'm like, I want you to talk about books that are good though. And they did like one book recently where they actually liked it and weren't debunking it. But
yeah, it's pretty rare.
It's very rare, but it's so fun to listen to them. They're so smart.
I like listening to like them talk about like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and some of those other ones like. These are ridiculous, but so funny.
They are, because like I forgot about some of these books, but I'm like, they were huge.
Yeah,
everybody read them. And then, just kind of exposing those a little bit. Yeah. Do you want to talk like more about some of your book recommendations?
Yes, I do.
So not just, we like to talk about what we're reading, but I feel like when we have guests, especially, we want to offer you a chance to talk about some of your favorite books, like anything that stands out to you. So Lindsay already perused the shelves and pre-picked some things that she loves.
We just happened to be in a bookstore.
We just happened to be here at Lake City Books.
It was very hard to choose because there's so many amazing books back there. I'm seeing Less and Less is Lost. Those are both excellent. Andrew Sean Greer is a beautiful writer. And I think a great example of balancing really great character development with like a plot that keeps moving.
Totally.
Because my joke is just that I'm like, well, maybe nothing happens, but the characters, are so great. I will say I have dabbled a little bit in like romance and because my very best friend from high school reads a lot of romance and I have not found a ton of things that I love. So I'm going to continue to sort of be open and let myself be open to that.
It's not a lot of literary romance is the problem. You know what I mean?
Curtis Sittenfeld is a great writer.
Okay, yes. And there's a couple, but I think that's part of it because I love romance, but I love it for reasons other than the
great writing.
Right.
Because sometimes it's like watching reality TV.
Yeah.
It's like easy. It's fun. It's like candy for your brain.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I feel that. I can feel, especially when people were like really into the literary stuff. I'm like, maybe romance isn't going to be for you. Or like I'm a fantasy person. And then so romantasy kind of gives me the best of both worlds where I get like world building, but also a little bit of smut.
My husband is a fantasy person and we used to try to exchange novels. So he'd give me like a Guy Gabriel Kay thing. He loves like Brandon Sanderson.
Yes.
He loves Neil Gaiman.
Yep.
He is currently like slogging his way through one of the George R.R. Martin books about like the history of the Game of Thrones worlds or something.
Sure. Yep.
It sounds
is
like
it Fire and Blood?
That sounds right. It's like something, it's like the Silmarillion, but it's like for Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And I was like, this sounds really rough.
Don't make me. Please don't make me.
I don't want to do that. But I feel like there's stuff like with literary fiction where it can kind of cross over. So my first pull here is really good, actually. I grabbed this when I was on vacation last year. This is hilarious. Like,
it looks
the cover
hilarious.
is so
You
good.
can tell it's
like,
going to be funny.
I laughed out loud, like while quietly reading. Like it felt goofy. The main character in this is I think she's in her either late 20s or early 30s. She was with her boyfriend for like 8 years. They were married for 1 and they got divorced. And she is dealing with the fallout of the divorce. And she just doesn't really know who she is without this husband. She is recreating her life. She's making a bunch of real bad choices.
You love to see it though, when it's someone else.
On Goodreads, people are like, I don't know, she's not very likable. And I'm like, listen, she is relatable.
Yeah.
The writer for this, I think, wrote for Schitt's Creek.
Oh, love
yeah.
that.
But
say no more.
This is really funny.
Okay.
It's such an easy, quick, you will devour it whole kind of read. And I really love it. So
Love it.
I'm assuming you wouldn't say the same thing about the bee sting. Let's show it in profile.
No, okay.
So that
it looks big, but this
Were
is
you like
an
pushing
incredible.
800 pages there?
Oh yeah,
This is an incredible
gotta
book.
be. Oh, it says 6.
Okay, they're thick pages.
Yeah, they're thick.
Yeah.
Okay, tell us more, because like I feel like I need someone to sell me on bee sting in order to dive in.
So the idea behind the bee sting is that there's a young woman, the mother in this book. The story of the day of the mom and dad's wedding is that she had her veil over her face the entire time, like the entire day of the wedding. And the thing was that a bee had flown into the car and stung her, and it swelled up. And I don't want to give too much away, but that's not the real story.
Oh,
Right. So it's about, I think, this family. They're in Ireland. Is that in Ireland? Pretty sure. Yeah, Ireland.
I think so.
And it's about this family, and about each individual member of the family is kind of going down these different paths, and they make you kind of hold your breath for some of them, because you're just like worried about what's going to happen to them, and like because they're making choices that are pulling them away from each other as a family. This is so beautifully written. It's one of those family sagas. It's like Pachinko is kind of a family saga too, right?
Yep.
That kind of story. Isabel Allende writes this kind of story too.
Multi-generational
family. Yeah.
Is it multi-perspectives?
It is.
So it kind of will flip between the family
Yeah.
members? Ooh.
It's really, really well done. Really beautiful. I saw this at a bookstore when I was traveling, and I was like, am I going to put this in my suitcase? No.
Right. Is it worth to lug it along with?
So I didn't. I waited until I came back to Madison, and then I
Nice.
put it, and then I got it from the library right away. But this is just, it looks big, but it reads so fast.
Yeah.
And if you're interested in Irish literature or things set in Ireland, I also just read by Caitlin Donahue, The Rachel Incident. Also excellent. But really, I think what they both do really well is they are giving you really precisely drawn characters. And there's a thing, right, in fiction where, like, if you want to have a story, bad things probably have to happen to your main character. They have to have something to overcome. And this is so beautifully done, I think, because you are so, like, I felt so invested in every story within this book. And it's incredible. Oh, it's incredibly done.
That was a good sales pitch, actually.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
kind of into it now.
Yeah.
And
It's funny because when it was first published, we didn't sell many of them at all. But when it was listed as one of like the top 10 of 2023, we couldn't keep it in stock here.
it's true. It really
Good.
blew up at the end of the year. I think once it
Yeah.
was out for a while and people started hearing about it, it was
Yeah.
very critically acclaimed. So
Yeah. All right, I'm sold.
yeah.
This is really, really good. That was in competition for my best of 2023, but I think this is the one that won.
I might have to agree with you. I loved Yellowface.
I love this book so
Yes.
much. So I also really loved, it's called The Plot,
Okay.
Yeah.
right?
Jean something correlates.
Yes.
Yep.
Hand correlates. You have The Latecomer, I can see on the
Yep,
shelf.
yep.
The Latecomer, also very good. I would say I liked The Plot even better.
Okay.
But same, I think, kind of idea, right? Where you have a story and there are questions about who owns it.
Mm-hmm.
Who owns that story? So, Molly, have you read this?
I haven't, but it's okay. If you want to do any spoilers.
Okay.
I've read other R.F. Kuang. I'm a huge fan, and I haven't because of the fantasy side.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this. It's sort of like Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gail Devin. Things that feel like they're a little bit fantasy, or that one has game as like part of the core narrative. And I'm just sort of like, do I want to read? I don't know. Is it going to be my thing?
Mm-hmm.
This is a straight up, classic fiction. And the premise is that there are two young women who went to school together. One of them is having great success, and one of them is not. And our main character, our narrator, has not had good success. She's like a white girl from Pennsylvania or something. And this friend of hers, who's an Asian American woman who has this incredible trajectory of her career. They, at the very, very beginning of the book, they are together when the friend dies. She chokes and she dies. But she has this perfectly beautifully finished manuscript just sitting there. And our main character makes a choice. And
snatch.
Yeah. And the whole book, I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for the consequences. Like, when is the other shoe going to drop? And the other shoe starts to drop. So,
hard.
Yes. And
publicly.
So interesting. But the way that it ends, you think, she's going to get her comeuppance and, this and this. And, she does, but also not quite in the way that you think. Like, it doesn't end the place, because we love these kinds of stories. We love this intrigue. This is such a good book, and it reads so quick. It's such a quick read.
And I've heard some people, I hear people talking, and most people either love it or hate it. There's no in between. The hate it, and maybe we'll get into some hot takes after this, because I've heard you have some. But the people that hate it just say, like, I hated that character so much that I couldn't enjoy the book. And I guess the way I stand is I'm like, I don't need to like the characters if I'm into what's going on, or if there's like relatable aspects, even if it's not likable, it can be relatable, or it can be fascinating, or it can be, you know what I mean? Like, so I think but I know there are people who like want to have someone to root for in order to get into something. So I think here they were like, can't root for anyone, hate it. Which has been, I don't know if you've ever heard of someone go like, oh yeah, it was fine. Like, I feel like people love it or they hate it.
Yeah, definitely. Because
it's very divisive.
The narrator is not a likable character.
She's not likable at all.
No. And it's like watching a train wreck that doesn't quite satisfy with the drop at the end. But in an odd way it does. Yeah. And
I would recommend, if you liked this, to try Babel by R.F. Kuang, which is a standalone, and it is very literary. The fantastical elements are kind of like background. It's much more like historical anti-colonialism. It takes place in like a Dickensian Oxford, where all of these people from other countries are brought in to translate words, because translation is what fuels magic in this world. And so it's all about words and literature. And there's all these footnotes like defining things. So it's very like scholarly.
Yeah.
But then these immigrants who are kind of forced immigrants, because it's also the time of the colonial, expansion of England, they start realizing they're basically being used to they're the ones with the knowledge of these other languages, and they're being used, and this magic is being harvested, and their own countries are still being ravished, whereas they're here and England is prospering. And so they kind of start pushing back, and then they really push back, and it gets crazy. So it's very political. It's very well written, just like you would imagine with R.F. Kuang. And it is explosive. How shall we say? It gets explosive.
That sounds really exciting, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of into that.
Love Babel.
Hi, this is Angela Russell, host of the Black Oxygen podcast. So, I am a Black woman that loves Wisconsin. That sounds like an oxymoron, but it is absolutely true. And I know I'm not the only Black person that loves this state. Black Oxygen podcast is all about amplifying the Black voices all throughout Wisconsin and a little bit beyond. I hope that you'll check out the podcast soon and let me know what you think. Take care. Bye.
Hi, Amy Impellizzeri, host and creator of I Know How This Book Ends podcast, and I have a confession to make. The most fun part about doing this podcast is not the celebrity VIP author guest list, although that is really fabulous. The most fun part is when I hear an author guest say, No one has ever asked me that before. I love that. On this podcast, we're trying to ask the unsanitized questions, the questions no one's ever heard before. I'm trying to surprise the author guests and hopefully surprise the listeners too. Tune in and see if I can surprise you. I Know How This Book Ends. Season 4 available now.
I feel like we pushed over Top Chef a little fast. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
I just read your latest behind the scenes article. It was so exciting. I was like,
too funny.
I loved all of the details, how like you were on camera and they had to be like, don't look at the camera.
Stop looking at the camera. And I was like, oh God, because like I'm not there to be filmed, right? So I just assumed that the cameras couldn't see me.
Right?
But that's not how
I'm invisible, right?
That's not how cameras work.
And the picture of you where you were like, I was like, Lindsay is all of us. She's
so happy to be here.
It's really happy to be here. It was funny because the day after I did the dishwashing at the Kitchen Challenge at Taliesin, I was talking with Jamie Lauren, who is a culinary director now. She's on season 5 of Top Chef, and she was sort of like, why did you want to do this? Like, why? Like, because if you're a media person, they will give you access, but they give you access in a very conscripted,
roped off
prescripted
little,
sort of way. Yeah. Because they want to control a narrative, which I think is a fairly universal thing. We all want to control our own narratives, but especially with like a large show like Top Chef, they also have secrets to protect.
Right.
So it was very much like, you are the media and we're allowing you on set, but you have to sign this really intense embargo. And then we're going to like walk you around to the thing that you can see. And like, I'm like, well, wait, what is that? No.
Don't look over there.
Over here. Focus. Because I'd be like, I just want to wander around and can I just like, nope. Mm-mm.
And then you got to be in the kitchen if you're a dishwasher.
So the dishwasher. So my friend
God.
Lauren was like, I need a couple other people. Do you want to do this? I was like, absolutely I do. So I got to go behind the scenes, but I am not on set as media. I am on set as a dishwasher, and my job is to wash dishes. So I can't take notes. I'm not taking photos. I am just trying my best to like notice as much as I physically can, remember it, while also doing dishes very fast.
Wow.
That's crazy.
How intense.
Really nuts. It was a lot. Yeah, by like 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was like, I don't know. It was a lot of work. But Noah, who was working with me, he's got like, he'd done this. He was at the Edgewater for several years. Like he'd worked in catering kitchens. He'd done all this and he was amazing. He was like positive, helpful. Like we were just pushing through.
Keeping the energy high.
Yeah. And I'm one of those people who's like, wait, so why? Like, why are we doing this like this way? Like, should we like do this? Or like, and he's just like, just keep going.
You just got to keep going.
Heads down.
Like,
just do it.
No more questions. Just keep going. And I'm like, okay.
Oh my
So
God.
I just tried to move as quickly as I could and like not hold him back. But yeah, the garbage disposal started failing pretty quickly.
Crazy.
So he was clearing it out and clearing it out and clearing it out. And after a while, it just, because it was designed for a home kitchen, the kitchen at Taliesin is something. It is, it's not designed for that kind of activity. Just not. So I'm sure it was really cool for them to like the next day to be able to go to the Harvey house and be like, oh, this is like a really big, beautiful, contemporary, like very modern, like all the tools you need. People kept running back and being like, I need a ladle. I'm like, we don't have any ladles. I don't know what to tell you. There are no ladles in this kitchen.
Well, and the interesting thing that you kind of mentioned in your article was they don't tell you some of this stuff of like, I kind of wish they did more on the show. I would eat that up if they were like, the place that we're in has these things going against it, or like we're really cramped in this little space, or there's like one garbage disposal that's barely working, or
you think it's the magic of TV and everything is perfect.
Right. Or when Jamie said like, oh, one time I forgot to bring a can opener and it was just like, what? And that's a thing. Like I would never even put that together. So that's such a cool inside look. And I wish that was exposed a little bit more and it had a little less of the Top Chef polish that now it has after 20 seasons. You know?
Totally. Because I think also like the fact that 2 of the chefs got to go first, I think made a massive difference.
Right.
Massive.
Because then they're out, right?
Yeah.
They got to, do they start staggered too then?
They
When
start
they're doing
staggered.
these
Yeah.
tiny
So it's like
kitchens?
every 30 minutes, another group 2 of chefs would go, because they don't want all the food at the same time.
Right.
And also like we're trying to get all, because it's only so many tools.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So like they used every Vitamix at least 3 times. Like it was so much blending. but it's like that where you have to get stuff back out to people. And there would be some chefs, for example, who would be like, oh, I want this quarter sheet pan back because we only had a couple in the kitchen. That's not necessarily his quarter sheet pan. That's the
Sure.
kitchen's quarter sheet pan. But
So
you
someone
just
else might
asked
try to
me-
come get it.
Yeah.
Or,
But he just asked me to hold it. And I'm like, oh, like, I feel like I'm not supposed to hold this for you, but also, so it just, that I feel like there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff. And I think one of the reasons that you don't see more about it is because a lot of these places have paid money or are getting something from Top Chef to be on Top Chef. So
Right.
like
the tourism boards are so involved
Right.
that they wouldn't want it to be disparaging on them at all.
Right. Yeah. Like,
yeah.
and I don't know if I didn't ask Shayna this, maybe I should, but I don't think the Harvey House paid anything, but it certainly cost
Sure.
them
Right.
to have Top Chef in their
Right.
space. So having that and then being like, well, the Harvey House didn't have whatever, like enough chinois. Like no one's gonna
Yeah, we don't need that to be the thing
Right.
that's
and then they'd
remembered.
probably be annoyed about it. So I think that that's part of it.
Good point.
Yeah.
You
Good
know?
point.
But there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff I think that makes a difference in outcomes that we just don't really think about.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating.
Yeah. I was wondering the other day whether the fact that they have to use Morton salt because it's a sponsor, and most chefs use Diamond Crystal, which is less salty because of the size of the crystals.
Oh,
Yeah.
And that affects the saltiness maybe
That
of their
affects
dishes.
the saltiness of dishes. So maybe if you're a chef and you're used to Diamond Crystal and you're using Morton instead, but you're doing it the same way, is that why so often dishes will come out oversalted or seasoned incorrectly?
For sure.
Right?
Fascinating.
But Morton's a sponsor.
But also if you knew you're going on Top Chef and that they always use Morton's, like maybe you start practicing with Morton's.
You could see this is what Patrick, my husband, always says. He's like, wouldn't you, if you knew there
I
was
agree
going to be a
with Patrick.
cheese challenge, then you would totally. And I'm like,
100%.
some of that, sure, but also
You can't
you're
know
getting
what the-
ready to.
yeah,
you
yeah.
get like whatever, a couple of months notice, and then you have
Yeah.
to leave your whole life for 6
Yeah.
to 8 weeks.
Right.
That's a lot to leave,
Right.
and you have to work your job until then. Like
Mm-hmm.
You don't have a lot of
it, sure.
practice
Yeah.
time. Yeah, totally.
Dan Fox apparently practiced for Chopped. He said he practiced,
I believe
which
it.
I think is great.
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah, that would be intimidating. I would have to practice, prepare.
yeah.
Gotta prepare.
Well, and I said, I asked Dan, I was like, you can be very intense when you're cooking. And he's like, yes, I know. And he said, because when you're on camera, you don't want to come across as a jerk when really you're just very focused. Right. And I think that can totally happen.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
like, well, he doesn't seem friendly. Well, no, he's just focused.
Uh-huh.
And maybe, some people, sure, are also probably not friendly, but
Right.
I don't know. I don't want to assume, but it's like, some time to practice, but maybe not all of the time.
Yeah, practice being on camera is like impossible too.
Yeah.
'Cause
Right.
you don't know how it's gonna come off.
Exactly.
Okay, I wanted to ask you one other thing about Top Chef that I've been thinking about watching this season and I was like, I wonder how Lindsay feels. So I feel like, I've watched every season of Top Chef. I'm a huge fan. I love reality shows in general, and a lot, but that's one of my favorites. But watching this season, I get like nervous every episode. Do you have that? I feel like my friend is on and my friend is Wisconsin and I want my friend to do well and I want them to come off well. It's like going to see like your friend's band and you've never seen them before. And you're like, God, I hope they're good. I hope I don't have to be like embarrassed of being in this band. And so now I've been like, oh, are they going to like, when they were going to the Monona Terrace, I was like, because we think it's commonplace. I see the Monona Terrace all the time. So I'm like, is that cool? Are they going to like this? Is this going to be good? And I know, and so far, of course, because the tourism boards are involved and it's all going to be very positive, but I still am thinking about all the other viewers at home in New York and LA. And I go like, do we look like hicks? I just like, I have this weird like Wisconsin imposter syndrome or something about us being the hosts. And it's making me like, I enjoy the episodes because I'll be like, look at that beautiful Milwaukee B-roll or like, I love those views. And so I like it. But then I also am so nervous that it takes away from my enjoyment a little. So anyway, I was wondering if you are feeling any of those conflicted things or if you're just like, oh yeah, it's going to look great and be great. And because you have more of the behind the scenes maybe, so
There
more,
was
but
somebody from the B-roll, like I mentioned it on one of our podcasts, and somebody who did the B-roll reached out and said, thank you so much for mentioning
I love
our work.
I feel
And
like
was
all
it's
Wisconsin people are just
beautiful.
watching the B-roll like, look at the Milwaukee
Recognizing those
River.
places,
I
yes.
know, it's so fun.
Yeah. And you just feel so connected to the season and like,
Oh yeah. I've been like pausing on certain B-roll things like, look at they do.
Yeah,
I paused so much. Like, so last week, I think I watched the episode 3 times, and that's not counting the time that I like paused a million times. Anyway, so I'm like, yeah,
Yeah, you're in
funny.
it.
very into it.
Yes.
I think so. There's a moment in the very first episode where maybe it was Charlie who asked one of the other contestants, like, how did you feel when you found out it was in Milwaukee?
Yes.
And I was like,
See?
ooh, okay. It's
know.
going to be fine. And I think it was Michelle who was like, I think every place has something to give.
Yeah,
like,
that's
I think
true.
It was great. And I really appreciated that response. Like, I think but I also wonder if there weren't like other responses that they just edited
cut
out.
Yeah. Same. And it made me, I was just like, oh, I wonder if all the places feel like this, that they go, or if it's just like, because sometimes they'll say like, people think it's flyover country. And I'm like, well, don't say that.
Yeah.
We know. Like, we know. It's like, we are here. And we also like have the internet. So like, we're clear. But there was Steph Bedford, who's our amazing recapper. She's doing wonderful work at captimes.com. And she's like doing these recaps every week, and they're really funny. But she was talking about how she thought Door County got short shrift in the Cherry Challenge, which I agree with.
Yeah.
And I think we'll probably see more Door County B-roll. Actually, I know that we will, but
sure.
See more Door County B-roll further in the season, and that's wonderful. But I think there's like a protectiveness that I feel.
Yeah. That's what it is, maybe.
Right? Like, I feel protective of this place that I have chosen as my home.
Right.
And also there's this element of like, if I make fun of Wisconsin, that's fine. I live here.
Right.
This is my home.
Right.
And I get to. But you can't. Outsider LA person. You don't get to make fun of.
Absolutely.
The thing that I loved about, so I was behind the scenes a bunch on Top Chef, right?
Yeah.
And the thing that I loved was how many people I found who either like, they hired people in Wisconsin, right, to work on the show, of course. But then there were people who had like moved out to LA that were from here.
Oh, nice.
And who came back, and they're like, I'm just so like excited to be like doing this work in my home state again. People from the La Crosse area, people from just who had worked and lived in Wisconsin and then moved out to, pursue their dreams of fame and fortune in Hollywood. And they are coming back to shoot this show here. And what a gift that was. So I feel like
that's a nicer spin.
More connected than we think.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
So
I'll try to, I like have to like meditate for a second before I watch every episode. Like, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. It's going to be great. So that I don't have that like little pull in my stomach. Like, are we going to look okay?
My strong perception from everything that I heard is that they had a blast here.
Yeah.
They were having so much fun while they were here.
Good.
Also, the reception that Wisconsinites gave Top Chef.
Yeah.
When Top Chef was
Totally.
here, they were like, people are so excited and so nice. And we're like, we are.
We're so nice here. Oh
See,
my
I have
God.
a different perspective because I feel that Wisconsin is so great that it's not going to be embarrassing. Like, we can
That's
only be
good.
highlighted
That's good.
from this.
Good. I like that for you.
Yeah.
You feel that way?
I love that for you.
Like, I'm from Ohio, and there will never be a Top Chef Ohio, and that's okay. But Wisconsin was chosen for reasons.
That's true.
Right.
Right.
That's true.
And I think we're showing up really great.
Yes. I
Okay.
agree.
That's why you don't have the accent like we do.
No, yeah. I mean, although I will say the Ohio accent is like, especially if I get a little lazy with it, maybe I'll start to
Comes
come
out.
out just a little bit more, like just a little flat, and that's okay.
It's so
I'm
cute.
into it. It's cute. I like it.
Too funny. Lindsay, this has been so much fun.
So much fun.
We
Thanks
could
for
talk to
coming.
you forever. Yeah. Thank you so much for
Being our first guest ever on Book Pop.
Absolutely. Yes, this is really fun. And I'm so excited to keep listening and get more recommendations because now you know exactly what I
Thank
like.
you. Yes. Oh, yeah.
you gave us so many titles too.
I know. I got to add some to my TBR
I
now.
know. Yeah.
I just got Rabbit Hutch. I'm excited to start that today. So,
Nice.
Yeah.
You can find all of these books for sale and more at lakecitybooks.com.
Thank you for listening to Book Pop. See you at the bookstore. This was a Speak.Studio original, hosted by Molly Fish and Jamie Anderson. Produced by Molly Fish, Jamie Anderson, and Dalen Kilgore. Tech director, Peter Benedict. Executive producer, Matt Boatwright Simon. Theme music by Lovick.